The photograph stopped me cold. Not because of what it showed, but because of what it couldn't have existed. It was 1893, Chicago, the world's Columbian Exposition, and standing in the middle of a city that had been, by every official account, a muddy frontier settlement 30 years earlier, were buildings. Not buildings. Cathedrals of stone and marble, column forests stretching 60 feet into the sky, domes that rivaled Rome, symmetrical plazas that made Paris look improvised. They called it the White City. 14 months. They said it took 14 months to build. I've been inside modern construction projects. I know what 14 months looks like. It doesn't look like that. I found this while researching something else entirely, the strange proliferation of mud flood theories circulating in obscure architectural history forums. I went in skeptical. I left with a folder of anomalies I still haven't been able to close. Because here's the thing about the official story of human technological progress. It is a story of linear ascent. Caves to campfires, campfires to castles, castles to combustion engines. The arc bends only one direction, upward, forward, always improving. Every generation knows a little more than the last. Every civilization inherits and builds upon what came before. That's the story. But the archive tells a different one. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Let me be fair to the official narrative, because it deserves a fair hearing before we interrogate it. The standard account of technological history goes roughly like this. Ancient civilizations, Egypt, Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, developed impressive capabilities within the limits of their time. They had no electricity, no mechanized industry, no precision instruments. What they built through massive human labor, rudimentary tools, and accumulated trial and error over centuries. Their achievements were extraordinary for their context. The pyramids took decades and tens of thousands of workers. Roman aqueducts were engineering marvels, yes, but marvels of simple physics and abundant slave labor. The knowledge that was lost, the Library of Alexandria, the techniques of Greek fire, Roman concrete, was lost to the ordinary chaos of collapsing empires, not to deliberate suppression. Progress stalled during the medieval period, resumed during the Renaissance, and then exploded with the Industrial Revolution. By the late 19th century, humanity had bootstrapped itself, through hard science and hard labor, to the threshold of the modern world. This is what every textbook says. Every documentary, every museum exhibit with its neat little timeline placards. It's a tidy story. The problem is Let's start with the numbers. Roman concrete, the material used to build the Pantheon, the aqueducts, the harbor walls at Caesarea, has now been formally analyzed by researchers at the University of California, Berkeley, and published in the journal American Mineralogist in 2017. Their finding, stated plainly in the paper's abstract, Roman marine concrete becomes stronger over time. The seawater triggers a crystalline growth process, the formation of a luminous tobermarite, that reinforces the structure from within. Modern Portland cement, our supposedly superior replacement, deteriorates under the same conditions. We spent 2,000 years improving on a formula that was already better than what we replaced it with. That's not a gap in knowledge. That's a step backward. The formula was lost somewhere between the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD and the present day. How? The honest answer is, nobody is entirely certain. The less honest answer, the one that gets repeated, is that it simply wasn't written down carefully enough. That the craftsmen who knew it died, and their secrets died with them, and that's just how history works sometimes. Which brings me to something that keeps appearing in the record, across cultures and centuries, that I cannot explain away with accident or entropy. The Antikythera mechanism was pulled from a Roman-era shipwreck off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera in 1901. It sat in the Athens National Archaeological Museum for decades, partially identified, largely ignored, categorized as a curiosity. It wasn't until 2006 that a team using advanced X-ray tomography published a comprehensive analysis of what it actually was. It was a mechanical computer, not metaphorically, not loosely described. A geared, differential, analog computing device capable of predicting solar and lunar eclipses, tracking the positions of 5 planets, calculating the 4-year Olympiad cycle, And this is the part that still floors researchers, accounting for the irregular motion of the moon, which requires a pin-and-slot epicyclic gear system that wasn't independently reinvented by Western engineers until the 14th century. The mechanism dates to approximately 100 BCE. The next comparable geared mechanism in the archaeological record appears over 1,000 years later. 1,000 years of silence. Not a single intermediate device. Not an apprentice's rougher version. Not a simplified copy. Nothing. The timeline is... Speaking of disappeared knowledge, there's a pattern that recurs so consistently across the ancient world that I've stopped being surprised by it and started being unsettled by the regularity. Damascus steel, the blade material that made medieval Islamic swordsmanship legendary, was capable of holding an edge that modern metallurgists still struggle to replicate. The production of Damascus steel, also called Wootz steel, required precise manipulation of carbon nanotube structures within the metal, a fact confirmed by Dresden University of Technology researchers in 2006, who used electron microscopy to identify the nanotubes in a 17th century Damascus blade. Carbon nanotubes, in a 17th century sword, manufactured by a process whose exact methodology disappeared sometime around 1750. The craftsman who knew it stopped producing it. No adequate explanation has been documented. The knowledge didn't evolve into something better. It just stopped. Greek fire, the Byzantine incendiary weapon that could burn on water, that drove back Arab fleets at the siege of Constantinople in 674 AD, that contemporaries described as impossible to extinguish, has never been reliably reproduced. The Byzantine Empire guarded the formula as a state secret of the highest order. When the empire finally collapsed in 1453, the formula appears to have collapsed with it. Modern chemists have proposed candidates: quicklime, naphtha, saltpeter. None of the proposed reconstructions fully replicates the behavior described in primary sources. The pattern is always the same: an extraordinary capability, period of flourishing use, then nothing. Not gradual obsolescence. Not replacement by something superior. Just silence and the faint outline in the historical record of something that once existed and then didn't. I want to slow down here and spend time on a building, because buildings are where the anomaly becomes impossible for me to argue away. The Sacsayhuaman Fortress Complex above Cusco, Peru, was constructed by the Inca civilization. The official dating places major construction in the 15th century, though the site shows clear evidence of multiple construction phases over a longer period. The walls are built from stones. That sentence does not convey the situation accurately. Let me try again. The walls are built from stones, some of which weigh over 300 tons, heavier than two full-sized Boeing 737 aircraft, and which were quarried from a site at Rumicalca, approximately 35 kilometers away. The stones are cut in interlocking polygonal patterns, some with 12 angles, that fit together with tolerances measured in millimeters. No mortar, no binding agent. The joints are so precise that, as every visitor to the site notes, you cannot insert a piece of paper between them. The official explanation is human ingenuity, rope, wooden rollers, earthen ramps, and massive coordinated labor. Researchers at the University of Illinois at Chicago estimated in 2020 that moving a single 300-ton stone using ropes, wooden rollers, and human muscle with period-accurate materials would require approximately 2,400 workers in conditions that are, to put it technically, biomechanically implausible given the terrain. The mountain approaches to Sacsayhuaman involve grades of up to 25 degrees. Maybe they found a way we haven't reconstructed. Maybe the labor was more efficient than the models suggest. Maybe the ramps were larger than any excavated evidence indicates. But here's what matters. The precision of the jointing is not explained by human ingenuity and rope. Precision at that tolerance level requires not just cutting capability, it requires a measurement and verification system of extraordinary sophistication, and that system has left zero trace in the archaeological record. Not one tool, not one measuring instrument, not one. Which brings me to the 1893 World's Fair, and the photograph that started all of this. The White City of Chicago covered 690 acres. It contained 14 major buildings, the largest temporary exhibition structures ever constructed at that point in history. The agricultural building alone was 500 feet wide and 800 feet long. These structures featured load-bearing classical facades, ornate neoclassical detailing, coordinated drainage and electrical systems, and a functioning canal network. They were completed in approximately 14 months. The official explanation is prefabricated steel frames clad in a composite material called staff, a mixture of plaster of Paris, cement, and jute fiber. Essentially, they were elaborate temporary facades over metal skeletons. I went looking for photographs of the demolition. The fair closed in October of 1893. Over the following years, fire and deliberate destruction reduced most of the White City to rubble. By 1896, almost nothing remained. What I found instead were photographs of buildings being dismantled, not demolished, in ways that look very different from tearing down temporary plaster facades over steel frames. There are photographs of workmen with tools that look like they are removing stone. There are images showing foundation depth that seems inconsistent with temporary construction. The Jackson Park site, where the fair was held, sits on what was then boggy lakefront land. The official foundation design for temporary structures of that scale, on that substrate, in that timeline, has never been fully documented in engineering records. I'm not saying the buildings were ancient. I am saying the documentation of how they were actually built in 14 months on unstable ground to that specification with that precision is thinner than the scale of the achievement would suggest it should be. The Smithsonian Institution holds some of the surviving construction records. Some sections of the administrative archive from the fair's organizing body, the World's Columbian Commission, are stored at the Chicago History Museum. I spent several weeks attempting to trace the primary engineering documents. Many of the detailed construction logs are listed as lost in subsequent fires at the offices of the firms involved. The timing is almost theatrical. Let me be clear about what I am and am not suggesting here. I am not suggesting a singular, coordinated conspiracy to suppress evidence of ancient technological superiority. History doesn't usually work that way. What I am suggesting is something that, in some ways, is more unsettling, a recurring systemic pattern of knowledge loss, sometimes through neglect, sometimes through the collapse of the systems that maintained it, and sometimes, the record suggests, through something that looks less like accident and more like active erasure. The Ottoman destruction of the Library of Alexandria's successor institutions is documented. The Spanish burning of Mayan codices in 1562, the Auto de Fe de Mani, ordered by Bishop Diego de Landa on July 12 of that year, destroyed what scholars estimate were the majority of existing Mayan texts. De Landa himself later wrote that the books contained nothing in which there was not to be seen superstition and lies of the devil, and that the Maya regretted this to an amazing degree. Thousands of years of accumulated astronomical, agricultural, architectural, and medical knowledge, gone in an afternoon. The part that keeps me up at night isn't that it happened. It's that it happened repeatedly. The burning of the Aztec codices at Tlatelolco in 1520. The systematic destruction of pre-Christian Irish manuscripts during the Viking raids of the 9th century, and again during subsequent monastic suppressions. The fate of the Royal Library of Ashurbanipal after the fall of Nineveh in 612 BCE, which held the most comprehensive collection of Mesopotamian technical knowledge ever assembled. Maybe these are all separate tragedies. The ordinary cost of civilizational collapse, the inevitable entropy of perishable materials, the carelessness of conquerors who didn't understand what they were destroying. Maybe. But the pattern of what specifically survives and what specifically disappears is not random. What disappears with suspicious consistency is the technical knowledge, the how of construction, metallurgy, astronomy, medicine. What survives is the commemorative, the what of conquest, the genealogies of kings, the religious proclamations. We inherit the declarations of power. We lose the instructions. There is a researcher named David Hatcher Childress. His work sits at the uncomfortable intersection of archaeology and speculation, who has documented over 40 sites globally where stone construction demonstrates precision jointing at tolerances between 0.5 and 2 millimeters. Sites in Peru, Egypt, Lebanon's Baalbek, Turkey's Göbekli Tepe, Cambodia's Angkor Wat, Japan's Yonaguni underwater formation. The mainstream archaeological community largely dismisses his conclusions while quietly acknowledging the precision he documents. Göbekli Tepe is the one that demands the most careful attention. Discovered formally in 1994 by archaeologist Klaus Schmidt on the Anatolian Plateau in modern Turkey, Göbekli Tepe is dated by radiocarbon analysis to approximately 9,500 BCE, making it, at minimum, 7,000 years older than Stonehenge and 6,500 years older than the oldest layers of Mesopotamian civilization. It contains carved megalithic pillars, some reaching 6 meters in height and weighing up to 20 tons, decorated with sophisticated bas-relief animal carvings. It sits on a hilltop, far from any water source, in a region that archaeological consensus tells us was populated only by hunter-gatherer groups who had not yet invented agriculture. The standard explanation has evolved over time. The current preferred academic framing is that Göbekli Tepe was a ritual center that actually preceded, and possibly caused, the development of agriculture, that the organizational requirements of building and maintaining the site necessitated the invention of food production. That's a reasonable hypothesis. It's also a significant revision to everything we thought we knew about the sequence of human civilizational development. And there's a detail that doesn't fit any of the hypotheses cleanly, mainstream or otherwise. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried. Sometime around 8000 BCE, someone, the builders, successors, or enemies, the record doesn't tell us, filled the complex with rubble and soil and sealed it. Not abandoned, buried. We found it because the deliberate burial preserved it. The sites that weren't deliberately preserved, we may never know what they contained. Here's the synthesis that I keep returning to, the thread I cannot pull free from. The official model of technological history requires us to believe that human beings spent approximately 200,000 years as anatomically modern Homo sapiens, developing essentially no lasting technological infrastructure, and then, in an extraordinarily compressed window between approximately 10,000 BCE and 3000 BCE, independently invented agriculture, metallurgy, monumental architecture, writing, mathematics, and astronomy in multiple locations simultaneously with no common origin and no common transmission mechanism. The mainstream explanation for this convergence is environmental. The end of the last ice age, approximately 11,700 years ago, produced climatic conditions that made settled agriculture possible. Settled agriculture produced population density. Population density produced specialization, surplus, and complexity. That's a coherent. What it doesn't explain is the precision. Not the existence of the achievements, the existence of precision within them that outpaces what the available tools and organizational structures should have been capable of producing. The 0.5 mm tolerance at Pumapunku in Bolivia, where H blocks of andesite, one of the hardest stones in the world, are cut to interlock like machine parts, with internal channels and recesses of irregularity that modern experimental archaeologists have been unable to replicate using period-appropriate tools. The geodetic positioning of the Great Pyramid of Giza, which is aligned to true north with an accuracy of 0.05 degrees, more precise than the Paris Observatory, built in 1671 CE, with the explicit intention of achieving maximum geodetic accuracy. These are not achievements that suggest a civilization feeling its way forward through trial and error. These are achievements that suggest a civilization that already knew the answer and was executing against a specification. Where does a specification like that come from? I don't have answers, only patterns. And the deepest pattern isn't in the stones. It's in the paper. The physical structures are too large to hide. The megaliths of Sacsayhuaman, the precision of the pyramid casing stones, the harbor walls of Caesarea, they sit in the open air, accessible to anyone willing to travel and look. What has been made inaccessible systematically and over a very long period is the documentation, the explanatory texts, the technical manuals of lost civilizations. There is a document sitting in the Vatican Apostolic Archive, formerly the Vatican Secret Archive, catalogued but largely unstudied by outside researchers, known as the Liber Pontificalis, which contains references to earlier administrative texts from the Roman imperial period that describe engineering methodologies in specific enough terms to have been practically useful. Access to the primary collection has been intermittently restricted for scholars not affiliated with approved ecclesiastical research programs. There are approximately 85 kilometers of shelving in that archive. The digitization program, announced in 2012, has processed a fraction of the collection. Maybe the undigitized shelves contain nothing that would change our understanding of the ancient world. Maybe. But the knowledge is somewhere. The buildings prove that. The mechanisms prove that. The metallurgy proves that. Someone knew how to do these things. Someone wrote it down or passed it on, or built it into the stone so precisely that the stone itself would carry the knowledge forward. And the question I keep returning to, the question I cannot answer, and that I suspect no one who has looked closely can honestly answer, is this: when we say the knowledge was lost, are we telling the history of a tragedy? Or are we inheriting the story that someone long ago decided that we should be told? The archive still exists, some of it. What remains is buried in plain sight, in restricted collections, in unstudied shelves, in the precision of structures we have not yet admitted we cannot explain. It is waiting for someone willing to ask the question that the official timeline has always quietly discouraged. What did they know that we forgot? And the harder question beneath that one: did we forget it